Hello, everybody. Oh, that works really well.
Yeah.
I was worried that the audio would be hard in here. But so I'm Steve Giralt. I'm based in Brooklyn, New York. I started in still photography, went into film. Mostly all food commercial videos is pretty much what we do. And then about 6 years ago, we started the garage, or the garage, depends
Sorry,
on
yeah, I should have checked with that first. The garage.
And
the
we're an innovation production company and services company based in New York. And we do we just try to break technology to make it do things that we want it to do. And that's kind of like the core of what we do and kind of pushing innovation. Oh yeah, I guess there's a whole video kind of playing behind me now too that has all the stuff that we do. I'm just one of our directors. I'm the founder of the company, also one of the directors. But my goal is really to always be looking for new tools, new opportunities to create stories in new ways. And that is kind of what led us into virtual production, where we're, instead of building a set, it's like we could build 5 sets without building any sets at all, almost.
Okay.
And with that, the challenge of it was we shoot so much slow motion. You'll see so much food. I hope you're not too hungry, everybody, because
you will be by the end of this.
Monstrous. But basically, what we found is like we need it to work in slow motion, or else it's almost useless to me. And when I started talking to everybody, they're like, it should be, this guy's like, it should be able to play 240 frames a second. It should be able to do this, but like, I'm the only one trying to break these things, And basically, that also goes with the red camera as well. How well does it sync at 240 frames a second with a wall compared to you're looking outside and the sync is less important. So, we'll kind of dive into it. But the biggest thing we found is like the clock was our biggest thing. You would think of all the things, you're like, oh, you just plug in Genlock and you're done. And it's like we found that it was really great that the red had P2P timing, which is something that we do use. We find that, just the simplest thing let us do so many other cool things that we'll get into, but basically that if you really work on the foundation of your systems and you work with really quality products such as Mark Roberts robots, the red cameras, disguise systems, it really opens the creative opportunities and the production opportunities in the kinds of stories we could tell.
Cool. So just as a matter of interest, for those of you out there, who's working in virtual production at the moment? Okay, so a couple of you. So it's probably worth doing a little bit of an explainer as to what virtual production is and what the volume is, Milo.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Yeah, so my name is Milo. Bit of background on me. So I've been working in the video industry for about a decade now. So corporate broadcast and advertising space. But in disguise, I've been focused on virtual production. So for a bit of context on virtual production, we're kind of talking everything to do with film and kind of scripted TV and utilizing LED walls. I mean, virtual production's quite a broad wording in the film industry, but what we're kind of talking about today is integrating LEDs with cameras, with perspective or just plate content, but essentially filming LED screens. What you're kind of seeing on this booth is the interaction between the camera systems and the LED. So you might have seen the XR stuff we had going on before we started. We'll show that again at the end, but that's kind of a broad, high-level overview.
All right, brilliant.
No, and for us, the thing is we shoot so many liquids. And if you try to do liquids on green screen, it's a nightmare. It's never going to look right. It's just refractions and just as simple as what a glass does to everything behind it. So as you saw that example where that was right there, it was just to be able to actually shoot the liquid in a real set with a real background behind it, well, real fake Unreal Engine background behind it. And it just opens up insane possibilities for us because, it's not just that we have the beverage and slow motion, but it's also sometimes we're dealing with ice cream or food and like you're out there on the summer day, not in the studio, it's going to melt in like 30 seconds. So, control is like honestly everything to us, which is why I got into robotics as well, to kind of rewind for a second, when I first started kind of creating content, some of you might have seen the burger drop video I put out, 8 years ago. That was just like this thing that went viral. And it was really the behind the scenes of it that really went viral because people were like, whoa, this guy looks like he made it in his garage, with some robot and some crazy thing. And the only reason I got into that was like, I want the camera to do this really fast. How do I do that? And it's always been for me that the creative drives the technical. It's kind of like the scientist and the engineer. It's like the scientist is like, I want to go to Mars, and the engineer's like, no, we can't do that. And then I'm like, no, really, come on, Assaff, build me a Mars rover. And that's kind of how you end up here. It's just with that same thing, virtual production. It could do 24 frames a second. It could do 60 frames a second. I'm like, can it do 240? Can it do 1,000 eventually? And like, same thing with the Red camera. It's like, can I get 120 frames at 8K? Like, yes, you can. And it's always about the tools, but it's about how creativity pushes them forward. And I think part of that, and I think it's a good conversation to have too, is adoption of new tools and how painful the early years of a new tool can be as well. Because I think virtual production in IC VFX virtual production, let's call it, right? It's the most accurate way to say it, is fairly new, and it's in its infancy. And for Assaff, I actually want to get your opinion. How long have you been in motion control? And if you look at the adoption rate, what does that curve look like?
Of motion control, virtual production?
Yeah, no, motion control, yeah. Okay.
So, hi, thanks. So, I've been actually doing motion control for about 35 years, believe it or not. So I know a lot about robotics. Virtual production really has rocketed in the last 4 years completely. And with the adoption of virtual production with robotics has really allowed it to expand, as in Steve's case, dramatically, because it is important for him when he plans his move that everything is programmed correctly and it repeats correctly, because he's got all these other things happening at the same time, like the burger dropping or the fountain exploding. Everything's happening, and it's got to match with the background as well. And to play it back at 240, I believe you are pre-rendering. Is that right?
Yeah.
So you can't change.
Right.
The angle has to be right.
Yeah.
So everything has to be pre-rendered, and therefore it's got to be exactly the right move. So that's kind of what we specialize in, and we do see, like, within the space of 12 months, I think 50% of our customers asked us about how to integrate their robotics with Unreal or whatever they were using for their virtual production, and obviously that has kind of, how do I get the data out? What do I do to get the data out to whatever system I'm using, whether it's kind of disguise or whatever it is? How do I get it out? And that was within a 12-month period. It just skyrocketed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for us is really the fact that we already owned the robots. We're like, what else can we do with this thing, right? Like, same thing. Like, we had the Red Raptor, X and they're like XL, and they were like, oh, we have this new X thing with global shutter and with phantom track. I'm like, how soon can I get that? Because we're using the LED wall. For those that don't know, the challenge of trying to do high frame rate on the LED wall. Well, there's a million of them, but one of them is getting banding in the wall or tearing in the wall, because it's refreshing the frame just like a rolling shutter would on a camera. So a global shutter goes a long way at helping us with those kinds of things, and luckily we didn't lose dynamic range either, which was amazing, because we do have a phantom camera, which is what we started doing the virtual production with, because it's basically a science camera and it's really great at sciencey kind of things like talking to a clock and stuff like that. But one of the challenges is that we were kind of in uncharted territories, right? Technically, like we had early discussions with this guys. We're like, can you play back at 240 frames a second, with multi-nodes and stuff? They're like, yes, it should, but we don't know anybody crazy like you that's actually trying to do this, And I think, that's where, I'm here always because I'm trying to see what the new tools are, talking to the people that make them, that support them, because if I'm going to invest in the system, I want to make sure that, they know the crazy thing I'm going to try to do, at least that I'm aware of today, and then tomorrow, they'll help me down the line as we try to kind of create new things.
So just explain Phantom Track in a little bit of detail.
Oh, yeah. So if you're not familiar with Phantom Track, we added to our Raptor X camera, which is the global shutter camera, and we were able to do that by adding this feature called Phantom Track. So Phantom Track is capturing 2 frames at the same time. So with Disguise, you can send multiple videos through the Brompton, and the Brompton has this thing called Frame Remapper. So you're getting one slice of a frame of your Unreal or your Plate or whatever you want, and then you're getting another slice of the same thing or something different. So I know there's a video playing on here where you shot I think it's like a Sprite commercial or something, where you have the screen playing 2 different things at the same time. If you look at it, you're like, I can kind of see a blend, something's going on, but not really, right? And then the camera's capturing each file separately. So in post, I can choose my A track, choose my secondary Phantom Track. So I have both Phantom Tracks there to pick pick what I want. And like you said, it's a different use case. I can use it as a safety net, or I can use it to be creative. So you have multiple options. But all the camera's doing is capturing 2 slices at the same time. You can pick what you want in your workflow.
Brilliant. How's that work creatively for you then? Obviously, there's a couple of different explanations there from Dan.
Yeah, so once again, when they came out with it, we were so excited, honestly, because we did this about 5 years ago, but manually, where we made a script that would take a file apart, and we had our own lights that we custom made to be able to do what I was talking about. So yeah, just to expand on that a little bit, like, so it's kind of like magic. If you're in the room, you're like, what is going on here? It looks like weird, it's blinking, and it's kind of funny. So it's basically like the wall is actually alternating each frame what the camera is seeing. So it looks like it's blinking between 2 different things. You could probably see it here somewhere, I'm sure. And then to expand on that, using specifically cream source lights right around the corner, we also could sync the lights as well. So we could have, you know, an A set of lights and a B set of lights, each running a completely different lighting scene. So you could have a, you know, daytime and a nighttime, or you could have, you know, basically, you know, all green and all red, or whatever, literally anything you want. So that just, once again, we're just getting started with it. Honestly, when did the X come out? Like 6 months ago or something? Like, we literally got it and we're like, how do we push this thing and really kind of come up with, you know, good solutions? And some of the things are just really simple. Like, on the LED wall, you can't really focus on the wall because then you get moire. So, but my client wants to shoot infinite depth of field. They want us to feel like we're outside and we get everything in focus. Well, great. We'll shoot it with the scene with the moire, and then we'll shoot the phantom track one with the green screen with a little moire, but you should key it out pretty well, and then we'll replace that background in post that we had from the Unreal scene already, which is really quick, a simple comp, versus, you know, spending tons of money on rotoscoping and then trying to fix it, and now you're in post for months, and, you know, just, you know, I am not a lover of post. My favorite saying is post is never finished, it's abandoned, because you could go on forever and ever. Like, I know my shoot days, yeah, we have some overtime, but, you know, at the end of the day, it's just like the client's gonna leave and we could go home and drink, and that's okay. But yeah, just to expand on the tools, you know, and Phantom Track and all that stuff is just like, you know, we love when people come up with amazing tools, you know, because, like, they can't, as they said, they can't imagine what we're going to do with them. And, you know, specifically for us, like, being this, you know, we're trying to do slow motion, macro, like, it's just like, it's honestly some of the hardest stuff to do, hence why we need robots and fancy cameras and fancy lights and all the most fancy stuff, because, you know, depth of field is a nightmare, and camera movement shake is a nightmare. Like, everything is pretty much a nightmare. You know, but we love that. It's so great.
So how have you been developing the robotics? So once he's finished breaking the cameras and adding bits to that, he then wants you to build him something special for him, or to, you know, break those. How does the development, think particularly for virtual production, is that working? And what?
Yeah, so effectively what Steve does is quite varied. He has different requirements. A lot of it is high speed, a lot of it is close up. So we have to continually work to kind of create new tools. I think if I'm answering this correctly, I believe Dan pretty much asks for a new software feature every other day.
Probably every week. Yeah, at least once a week.
And we do like we do a release every week with new features. Depending on what's being asked for. But yeah, we are constantly, on a weekly basis, releasing new features for our robots in our Flare software, which is really what's used kind of universally on all the robots that are used here and by Steve. And then we are, we have tools like Robotics, like the new Cinebot range, which are kind of very lightweight, that can be taken on location very easily, but then also be used with a in a volume to kind of mix and match, which I don't think you're doing, but some of our clients are doing.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
And then we've got at the other end of the scale, we've got the high-speed Cinebots, the bolts, which you are very familiar with because they are vital for your workflow. And then we've got at the top of the end of the range, we've got like the Milo, or now the Super Milo that's just been released, which is basically really your ultimate tool for macro work. It is just, it's a beast for macro work and everything else. It is a beast. It is fantastic though. And all of them really can be used with a volume or in virtual production to create exactly what's needed. And we are, constantly working to improve on them and kind of make them better and more usable and easier to use. And just the list goes on in terms of the features that are added.
Yeah, and I think...
And now we've also kind of added integration with the RED cameras as well, so you can control the RED cameras from the software directly, which is fantastic.
Yeah, and the thing is with virtual production is in your standard system, you have a tracking system. You'll see Moses around here. You'll see there's all sorts of different tracking systems. But Assaff mentioned, but didn't really kind of dive into the fact that the robots know where they are in 3D space as long as you tell it where it is in the room compared to the wall. You could tell that to Disguise or whatever system you're using. But the other coolest thing is that normally with any other tracking system, you're going to have some sort of latency. So if I want to do a whip pan across the wall, that frustrum, which is the inner box that you see on the LED wall, is going to be lagging behind the camera because, once again, it is analyzing where the camera is as quickly as possible. It's rendering that frame in Unreal, putting it through the processors and getting it out to the wall, but inherently there's got to be a little bit of lag. But with the robot, since we're pre-programming each and every single move, we know where we're going. Like, there's no surprise, so you could literally have zero latency because the robot one of the Flare capabilities is to fix that.
You could even do that live, because even if you're controlling it using a joystick, basically you delay slightly by a fraction of a second what the robot's actually doing, but give the graphics in advance the position, so that or the timing, so that it has enough time to render. It's interesting because when I first started in robotics, one of the first big jobs I worked on was for a little Israeli company that became eventually VizRT. But they were developing one of the first virtual studios, and we supplied them with the robot, the first Milo, in fact. And they needed this feature where the graphics engines at the time took a long time to render, like several frames. So we allowed them to have zero latency by giving them in advance where the robot was going to be in several frames time.
Right.
And to see that now being used again broadly is fantastic, because that was developed 30 years ago.
Cool, amazing. And so Milo, from your side, on the Disguise side, right? Like, everybody is like, make it faster, and you're like, this is the fastest thing you're going to get, right? Like, talk to me a little bit about your experience in virtual production and some of the tools that you guys have created to kind of help people like me,
Yeah, absolutely. So for users that don't know, Disguise is a platform, so it's hardware and software to program whatever you need. So everything we're seeing on the LED is on Disguise right now. So when it comes to virtual production, we have a few tools. So primarily virtual production is 2D content plates, but obviously 3D real-time engines are becoming more and more prevalent. And so we have a tool and a protocol called RenderStream. And this is a fully scalable system to get video content from render clusters, which are our hardware called RX3s. They feed into our composite servers, and we basically stitch everything together. So if you've got a small volume like this that requires one render node, or you've got a volume that might need 20 render nodes, we all synchronize that and deal with all the complex maths for you. When it comes to latencies and tracking systems, we've heard about you can have pre-delays, delays already in the tracking systems themselves. We have predictions as well you can use. So we're always focusing on that because you get tracking data, but you need to predict where you're going to be, but not all the way, because there's all of these stacks of latency. So we fixed that, and the same goes for lens latencies as well. So what we've developed as well that's coming out soon is when you're pulling content from Unreal Engine, we're actually going to pull a depth map as well from Unreal Engine, so your perceived latency is even lower. So you'll still have the latency, but using a depth map, you can actually warp the imagery that's coming into Disguise, so the perceived latency is again lower. On top of that, with plates and Disguise being a 3D piece of content, 3D software, we've developed a 2.5D workflow. But inside this 2.5D workflow, you can use 3D assets. So if that's a photogrammetry scan of a location, if that's multiple different 3D assets in 3D space, you can put that into Disguise, and there's not necessarily any rendering happening. It's not going externally and back. So it's much, much lower latency. We're talking single digit frames, so 1 or 2 frames latency from tracking system to Disguise and then back out to the LED, dependent on your LED processor. But but you again have a full 3D environment inside the software. So you can't change the lighting, things like that, but you can move things around, and you have full parallax and tools to do that. So, yeah.
And so we talked about the cameras developing and the robotics developing. How's your relationship with clients like Steve and him asking for things, and how quickly do they develop?
Yeah, absolutely. Ongoing, as we've seen. The industry is moving very, very fast. In like 2020, there was about 3 VP XR studios. Now we're powering more than 400 studios globally.
Wow.
And so Disguise is quite prevalent. We have a lot of requests all the time for multiple different features, and we try to get to them as quickly as possible. We don't just do virtual production. We do the live industry. We do the broadcast industry.
Yep.
So there's a lot of requests all over the place. But we're trying to prioritize virtual production because it's becoming more and more mature. We're trying to get these tools. So a few examples, we have something called a shot recorder in the software, which you can record any piece of data, whether that's dynamic live updating or static values, for post-production. I know we said we don't like post-production, but a film industry will be doing this.
It's necessary. It's okay.
Somewhat necessary, yes. So we can record all of that, the calibrated and uncalibrated data. And so in post-production, you can recreate things exactly. Other things that I've been focusing on as well is the interaction with other crew members. Obviously, Disguise is a piece of software. It's a keyboard and mouse. Not everyone knows how to use Disguise. And there are specialists that have specialist jobs, color grading. The DIT potentially needs to color what's seen on the LED or certain objects or assets within Disguise. We have tools to break that out so they can be at their own desk with their own tools and feeding into Disguise. Same with lighting. Let's say I want the lights to react to this content. I could send that to a lighting op who then makes the final adjustments as opposed to me sending it directly to the lighting. So again, it's breaking things out and giving the tools to the people that are the experts so they can still do their jobs, even though things may be going through Disguise and back out. So, yeah.
No, and for us, that's the number one thing when we moved into virtual production. We're like, wait, but it shouldn't all go to one guy that's controlling everything. It's like it's the worst. It's like that one guy is every department's like screaming at him, change the lighting, change this, change that. It's like, so we're like, okay, wait, let's exactly to your point. We're like, can we get some little sliders or little keypads for the gaffer so you can control where the sun angle is and how bright it is and things like that. And that's part of when we're doing the 3D workflow with Unreal is like you could build all sorts of stuff into your scene, knowing ahead of time what you're going to want on set as far as controls for different people, so that your lighting person could do the lighting. He doesn't have to know anything about Unreal. Your gaffer's doing his thing. Everybody is doing the things that you're hiring them to do, right? Like they know lighting, they know cameras, they know, same thing when you get into motion control. It's like, oh, they don't know anything about robots. Like they don't need to. Our operator will bridge that gap and, say, oh, what kind of move do you want to do? And, one of the fun things is Mark Roberts even has an iPhone app that you could kind of use your phone to kind of do the move and then give that to us and like, oh, okay, cool. Now I get what you're trying to do. Now we'll make it a little prettier so it doesn't feel handheld like a phone unless that's what you want, which is actually useful for that exact thing. But it's just about, how do we, nowadays you have to be efficient too. It's like, it's not just creative, fun, like, yes, I would do this all day long if I didn't have to, pay for space and employees and all those things. But at the end of the day, it's like we are here to make work as best as possible, make our clients happy and make them come back, and the tools are part of that. And, some jobs, it's funny, like I get hired. People are so sad if there's no robot on set. They're like, wait, but we came, you're the robot guy. Why isn't there no robot? And we're like, because we didn't need one. Like at the end of the day, it's like, use the tools you need. Don't just use tools just to use them, right? It does make a great tripod, as you see. That camera's not moving at all. And we've used it plenty of times for some shots as a tripod. But, because sometimes trying to get up there from a dolly is really hard. But it's always about understanding what you're trying to accomplish. And, sometimes the budget defines that, sometimes the client's defining that, but for us, especially in advertising, it's just like, is it serving the client? Is it serving the creatives? And, is this the right tool to use? And I think it's really easy to get caught up in virtual production as like, it could do everything for everyone. It's like, no, if you're trying to shoot half the day looking at the floor and then up, down or whatever it is, like, no, go to a real location. Like it really has its use case. For us, as you see, you almost never see the floor. We're always up in the tabletop size area. So for us, it's amazing. It's really such a great tool. You just add a few layers of production design in the foreground, and boom, suddenly the whole room transforms. And being that we're in New York City, it's not the cheapest place to build like 4 kitchens for 3 seconds each of a spot that we need. Like it is kind of really kind of ridiculous, and we always fight it too, even environmentally. Like we're going to build this whole thing and tear it down and throw it away, and it's just like there's a better way. And obviously each client's needs are different, and it's for us to kind of decide what's the right balance. And sometimes honestly we have multiple sets going. One's a virtual production set, one's a regular set, and then maybe we'll shoot some stuff on location. It's like it's just a matter of understanding all the tools that you have capabilities to find and what they could do, and that's why we try to break them on the first day. We're like, okay, you say you could go how fast on your camera? Great, let's go there first. And then you work backwards from there, right? Like how fast, with Assaff, there's plenty of times where I'm like, that's really as fast as the robot could go? Can we not go just a little? Like, I know you say it's at 105% speed. Can it do 110%? They're like, maybe. I'm like, oh, let me try. So, for me as a creative and technologist, it's kind of an interesting place, right? I'm kind of like bridging the gap between these guys and the creative side.
So is there for you now? Is there a standard process of a creative process of going right? That's the brief. This is, or do you find it changes every time, and you just an idea pops in? And I'll go.
So
see
different
if I
every
can break
time.
it this way.
Yeah. No, I mean, like example, what's playing here, this work we did for Pepsi Global, like this was 6 months of ideation with them. We got paid to actually do an R&D test for them of just like, because you could storyboard things to death, but will it actually work in real life with working in slow motion with stuff like this, right?
Yeah.
Like, at the end of the day, there's a limit to, and we push that limit, but what is physics and what is optics and, the rules of the foundations that everything in these rooms are built around. But it's also like new tools let us try to bend those things, slightly differently. But we're technically usually called not for the standard thing, but to do something new every time. Like even that Pepsi Global work, we had done the campaign for them 4 years ago, which they ran for 4 years, and then they're like, great, we use those assets, now we need some new ones that are better than those assets. They're like, but that was the best we could do back then, but now it's been 4 years, so what can we do now, today? And I'm sure, that was like 2 years ago. This last round, if they come back in 2 more years, we'll be like, oh wow, well now virtual production will probably be part of that solution in some way,
So just going back to the old way of doing things with green screen and stuff like that, what are the inherent advantages of virtual production, and are you now going straight to virtual production on everything? I know as an over green screen.
Right. Yeah. No. I mean, I think there's a use case for blue screen, green screen. All depending. But for us, virtual production with especially food, liquids, reflective, which is almost everything we shoot is reflective liquid. Has some sort of glossiness to it. Trying to get rid of the green screen on that is a nightmare. So it is honestly, it was either build a set or a translate, or now virtual production are kind of our options. Yeah.
Cool. Just to wrap up, I'm just going to go down the line and kind of where do you think we're going to go next? There's new things obviously coming. How do you think this virtual production is going to develop, or is it we don't know until Steve asks for something? Dan?
Just here we go.
Yeah, no, I think, every time I see any type of virtual production going on, there's always new ideas and concepts being used in it. Like my favorite has been recent ones where, hey, an actor, they have to do a reshoot, right? And they need to figure out, we can capture plates at the production or wherever the shoot was, and they can do it later on. It's not the end of the world. It's not going to cost as much as it can be. So just find the right use case and how people are using it is super interesting to me, because it's only going to get better and better, and determining how they can use it, especially like car plates. I think that's fantastic. It's an amazing use case, and it makes life so much easier instead of trying to figure out production, the headache of shooting in a car or location. Doing it on a volume just makes sense. So we just see a lot more people understanding how to use a tool and how to best take advantage of it, and I love that. So we're just seeing it, always getting better and better and better every single time.
Yeah. And I'll run a lot of parallels to my experience with motion control here, where it's just going to get easier. I think that's Assaff touched on it a little bit. It's just like virtual production is really hard right now. Honestly, it's like none of these tools by themselves were designed to do the whole thing, right? You're cobbling Disguise with Unreal, with a clock with all these different things together, and I think and once again, compared to a year ago, it's that much easier. Next year is going to be that much easier, and I think capable of just being more fluid and less of a concern that everything's going to work.
So just on that, from the creative process, because it can be difficult putting these things together. It doesn't seem to slow you down though. On that, how are you with the creative versus the technical?
We don't like to say no to things, generally speaking, and we're like, oh, we need brighter LEDs. Like, nobody made them, so we made our own chips out of China, made our own lights that liquid cooled them, and once again, if I see the solution is a good solution for us and the work that we're going to create, we'll fabricate it. Like, okay. I don't know if you saw in the video, like, we have like a full machine shop with a Haas CNC mill, and we have a full fabrication department in the garage itself, and all the mad scientists are basically our full-time employees, and that's what we do every day. So we do that for our own projects and just the things I'm excited about, and also for other services that we work for as well, where we're like, oh, is there a way to do a perfect dolly zoom but with a regular dolly? So we actually created, using Flare, an encoder to put on a regular dolly that still uses Flare to just do the dolly zoom on the lens, but the key grip is still pushing the dolly and interacting with the talent just the way he is. You just don't have to worry about the ACs hitting exactly the dolly zoom perfectly every time. So it's just like, some things that should be easy, and if they seem too hard and it's important enough to us, we'll make it easier, by making it hard on ourselves at first, but eventually it's easier.
Brilliant. Assaff, just to back to
I kind of agree with that. I mean, effectively, it is all about making the workflow easier. That's what's always being worked on, and kind of interfacing to other systems and making that interface simpler. I know 3 years ago when kind of virtual production really kind of started taking off 4 years ago now. It was very hard initially for anybody to actually get decent results without spending a lot of time trying it. Obviously, there's still a lot of that. As Steve says, it's hard. It's not that easy, but it has progressed so much, and it's become so much easier for people to do it with the interface that exists in the various, the skies, various bits of software, in kind of interfacing to various bits of hardware, the lighting, everything is just moving at a very fast pace to make that easier, and it will become, more and more commonplace. I mean, it's becoming like that quickly, but it will become very, very commonplace. So yes, the tools will just get simpler, and there's always an element of as the tools get simpler, more features get added, and they make it more complicated again. It's a bit like post-production. There is never an end to development or software development or hardware development. But yeah, it's all being done to allow people to be more creative, spend more time being creative, and not worry about the engineering behind it. Really.
Brilliant.
Cool, yeah, so from kind of a disguise point of view, so primarily what we're seeing is obviously technical advancements. So part of that, we've got an IP card in our servers now, so SD2110 outputs or 12G SDI. But that links in with something we mentioned earlier, PTP sync. So with that card, you can sync our servers with PTP versus Genlock, which is really quite useful for high speed. From the industry kind of side of things, we're seeing a few shifts in the Unreal Engine kind of thing. There's a few engines bubbling up in the background that are quietly ticking along and coming more to the forefront. And kind of from a disguise point, we're not locked into Unreal Engine for real time. We've always been agnostic with what you want to use. In the past year, we've integrated with Voilenga, which is something that can generate Gaussian splats and nerfs. I wouldn't say they're production ready just yet, but they're really good content that you can use for, again, like we said, reshoots on location. But we're always trying to be one step ahead of the game and being ready for whatever comes next. So we'll see in the next few months. I think lastly, from the studio perspective, at Disguise, we're obviously in a lot of studios. We see a lot. We have a communication a lot with a lot of Hollywood films. We worked on a couple as well directly, myself personally. And we're seeing LED volumes being built for specific shots. So we've all seen and heard of these mega volumes, which are great and super useful. But actually, for a lot of the shots, you need quite specific reflections on certain objects, or you need the specific shapes to get things to do the shots that you need and have the cameras in the positions you need. So we're seeing that a lot of bespoke studios that will be rebuilt, from week to week, depending on the shot. And so we're seeing a lot more of that rather than the mega studios. Both are really valuable, but it's a tool, so you need the tool to work for what you need it to work for. So, yeah.
Brilliant. That brings us just about to the end. I think we've covered everything, chaps. Any questions out there? Anybody, anything you'd like to ask? I'm sure Steve wouldn't mind sticking around to answer a few questions afterwards. But if you wouldn't mind putting your hands together and thanking our panel, particularly Steve, came all the way from NYC to join us.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, chaps.